Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you from the Colonial Dungeon, this is the Court Martial Podcast! Introducing your host for this evening, he has a bald spot on the top of his head, and he weighs in tonight at a number you don't need to know. He is the Colonial Loudmouth, Sean McCarty!
And welcome to another edition of the Court Martial Podcast. I am, as always, your Colonial Champion, Sean McCarty, and boy, do we have quite a lot of things to talk about today. A bittersweet episode of the Court Martial Podcast, as certain events of this week have changed my plans for what I had anticipated doing this week, and I have altered them to particularly address something that happened recently in the wrestling community that has taken pretty much everybody by surprise and is really, I think, hurt, not in a bad way, but just stung for the wrestling community. We all mourn together on this one, and we'll talk about that and talk about him in a minute. And I'm sure most of you already know who I'm talking about, but we are going to start by giving a little programming update. Will not take too long. That I have made a decision based on, first of all, thank you every single one of you who watched and tuned in to my live watch through of the episode of Smackdown, for which I have the script of, and it was a fun time. I had a great time. I hope you guys all had a great time as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, what my takeaways truly are. If you want to see my watch back, that is on the channel. You just have to go to certain live streams. It's a certain tab after you go to I'll put the link in the description, but if you go to the YouTube thing, you say view videos and uploads, and then you switch over to that and go to live streams. You can still rewatch it. And it was definitely some grainy footage that I have now rectified the issue as to why that happens. So the next time we do it, we're not going to have that issue. But speaking of the next time we do it, I have decided, after teasing and teasing and teasing and teasing for months and months and months and months and months, that we were going to have the Court Martial Drive-By, the second supplemental show. I am Emelinaing this idea. So I am nixing the Drive-By, and again, you will hear probably if I end up being just scrapped for time 1 week, or if I do, or whatever the case may be. If I find myself scrapped for time, and I might piece together some of those drive-bys that I did together to make kind of a Court Martial Podcast in substitution that week. I'm going to try not to do that much or any, save for that. It was a bit of burnout at the time, but it will not happen again unless I feel like making it happen again. But the point of this is that the drive-by is not going to be a thing, because I don't like the idea of just taking everything from Cornette. And because of that, we're going to do something different. We are going to do every 2 weeks, or whenever I feel like it, but probably every 2 weeks, we are going to be doing live streams, watching old shows, and getting my reactions to them. That's right, I am joining the cavalcade of other podcasters and YouTubers who are whoring themselves out to the idea of the video camera, getting their reactions to certain things, and we're going to go through all sorts of stuff. We're going to go through old territory videos. We're going to go through old WWE stuff. We're going to go through Attitude Era and Ruthless Aggression, maybe even more modern stuff. We are going to do a whole set of just reviewing old shows, talking about old shows. Maybe we'll go in sequential order. Maybe we won't. Probably we won't. Because I'm not going to be doing these at that frequent a basis. But we're going to play around with it a lot, so I'm hoping that you all will join me on those. They will likely be on a Monday or a Tuesday, which was the original time that I was going to give the drive-by. But instead, we're going to do this, and I really am excited to do it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I appreciated y'all coming on and making a good time of it, and we're going to have more good times to come. And if you didn't get a chance to see the Smackdown episode rewatch, I recommend you watch some of it. And moreover, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this script and what we saw and what was not on the show And we're just going to do a quick run through this. And now that I've seen the show, I can articulately manifest what it is I was trying to say when I first read through this. And now that you can actually see this episode aired on the 17th of January 2014. So they do it last time we were here for Worcester, Mass, which is where they were having this particular episode. They talk about what happened at the live events that were there. And they talk about some of the buy rates and things like that. Not a ton. They do before the show, they do a preconditioning of the house by airing a New Age Outlaws package. Then they do, then the first match is Cody Rhodes and Goldust versus the New Age Outlaws. And pretty much everything here went the same. Vicky Guerrero was great because Vicky came out and she was pretty much the only one who read her lines word for word of anybody. And there were a couple distinctions, but really there weren't that much of a distinction. But Vicky comes out just to cut a promo on the Royal Rumble, and that, hey, we were going to have a Royal Rumble, and hey, maybe you two brothers might have to fight, and that ends up costing them the match. It was probably the only thing that I could have critiqued as far as sounding like script, but Vicky she's just such a heat magnet, which just adds to how much the respect I have for Vicky and how much she came into her own in the pro wrestling business. But everything was this, they cut out a lot of graphics. Unfortunately, I think that Mae Young had died not like 3 days earlier, if not less. Probably less. Well, no, it had to have been 3 days because this was aired on this was taped on that Tuesday. But that one was a decent contest. I thought that went pretty well. They have timestamps here. They didn't really follow, but I also think that was partly because we watched this on the network instead. Paul Heyman cuts a good promo on the Big Show, and then the Big Show comes back, and I forgot that it was Big Show and Lesnar in 2014. And the thing I really noticed about most of this, and especially because Big Show was able to talk a lot more than was written on the page. And of course, Paul Heyman was not going to be scripted. There's no way Paul was going to be scripted. Then Mysterio and Del Rio. Del Rio had Mexican flags in the corner of each part of the ring, which I thought was hilarious. But even Ray's promo is everybody got to make the words their own, which I noticed. The writing was straight up garbage throughout this script. I mean, straight up garbage. The grammatical mistakes alone, let alone the content of what they said, but the grammatical mistakes alone made it look like this was done by a child. And I'm not saying that it was Vince McMahon necessarily. I'm saying that whoever was writing this obviously did not care too much about grammar, because a lot of what the type is here the words don't make any sense. You know, which is kind of nice to have talent who knows how to do the general gist and then make it their own, because like Big Show cut a good promo. Like the promos tonight were quite good because they were different. You know, they weren't, especially now that I'm looking at the words and how just cringy the words are. To have talent that can spin those words and make them still like it sound like it's coming from them while still getting the gist of what the point you're trying to get across. That is really what constitutes a good promo. And you got promos from CM Punk, who surprisingly stuck to the script for most of his promo, although I think a lot of that was just he was only, 10 days away from leaving WWE because his passion was gone. So, that doesn't really say much about Punk. Obviously, he was a great promo cutter. He could talk his ass off. Mysterio comes in, and Mysterio does his thing, and of course he cuts a pretty good promo. Ray and Del Rio go through the break. That was probably the best actual match of the night. And then we had Naomi and Tamina, and that was just a regular match. That really didn't have much to speak of. It was as rough as you'd expect it to be. A match between Naomi and Tamina, especially at the time. This is 2014. And then the Wyatts I don't think we ever got the Bray Wyatt promo, did we? Wyatt never came on. That's so weird. Oh, no, yes, he did. Yes, he did come on. I'm sorry. Bray Wyatt did come on and talk about Daniel Bryan in the way that only Bray Wyatt can, and Bray Wyatt obviously was not scripted. Then they had the Intercontinental. They had Big E against Fandango. Oh, what a weird time this roster was. You know, Big E was just getting started. He was Intercontinental Champion. I had forgotten that up until we had gotten to this. Then they do the Batista cut. Then the Shield has their promo, although they kind of rearranged this around so they could get a Mae Young package in, which is probably what makes this script so unique, because this didn't have any of the Mae Young stuff put in it prior to. So this was written before that was known and before things got shifted around, which tends to happen in WWE. And now I've been able to see it firsthand that this was not, this was, as it was written, it is a second draft as opposed to being the final concrete what they went with. Then they did of course, this was as they were plugging the WWE Network. They have the Shield promo, and even the Shield promo were great because they also made all of their, what they said, their own. Even Roman Reigns, I gotta give more credit to Roman Reigns. I think he had more ability at this time to make the words his own. And I think that is really the most interesting part of all this, is you look at the talent roster then, and you could claim it's thin or they were just getting established or what, blah, blah, blah. But at least everybody was able to make what they were given theirs, as opposed to, I think, a more stricter policy now where everybody just recites the lines as they appear on the page, whether they make any sense or not, give or take certain people. But I think the amount of liberties given to wrestlers has very much changed as far as what they're allowed to do and how much they're being micromanaged. Because even at this point, I had really removed myself from fandom at this moment, from real heavy hardcore fandom, and I got back into it in 2015 with Rollins cashing in and the whole deal. But I wasn't watching the show at this point. And it's really interesting just to see that, I think there is, prior to me watching this, I would have always said, oh, it's always the script and it's always what they're given that suck. But really, now I'm starting to understand that maybe it isn't just the script. Maybe it is that because the people they hire or the format that they have evolved into as PC culture has gotten even stricter since 2014. I mean, 2018 was bad enough, and it's only gotten tighter and tighter and tighter. And I think with that level of fear and paranoia that WWE has about disrupting shareholders, they put a much tighter rein on the talent, and now the talent kind of have to recite it word for word, and it makes it really difficult when you've got people who look more natural and feel more convincing when they would be able to just take some liberties. Not all the liberties, but some liberties. It'd be nice to see them figuring out some sort of balance. But maybe some of it is, in fact, the talent not being able to cut decent promos. That is still a possibility. But we know Seth can cut a promo, but then they make him do the monotone stuff. So they need to loosen the grip. That's really what this has taught me. And at this point, in 2014, as disjointed as they felt for the longest time, at least this episode of SmackDown on paper, well, not on paper, but in the grand context of what we get now and the kind of storytelling we get now on a weekly basis, at least this SmackDown made sense. From start to finish, this generally was pretty solid. I mean, as far, and it wasn't the great, obviously this is 2014 SmackDown, but for 2014 SmackDown, at least this had some continuity to it. At least this had some semblance of seriousness that we just don't get now. And it had some level of sense from the beginning and the opening promo and the Rumble promo all the way through until we got the big promo with the Authority. and Corporate Kane, which ended up being his permanent gimmick now that he's the mayor of Knox County. But I don't know if Kane goes to board meetings without a shirt. I would hope he's dressed up in a suit, and he doesn't just show up in just dress pants and shoes with no shirt, because I thought that look was the dumbest thing. I liked Corporate Kane, but I did not like just shirtless with dress pants look of Corporate Kane. And I didn't really like Corporate Kane at the time either, so I really shouldn't glorify it the way that I did. Oh, and then they did a bunch of Divas bumpers, which I thought were weird, like, hey, I'm a diva, enjoy this next. And of course this was before we had the Four Horsewomen. So really, the women's roster at the time really consisted of pretty much the Funkadactyls and Tamina and AJ Lee, who looked great. And reminded me how lucky a man CM Punk truly is. But it was really fascinating going through this whole thing, seeing what was good, seeing what was bad, and seeing what would have been downright ugly had they actually adhered to this version of the script. But this was a great set of fun. It was great to be able to go down memory lane and find a little piece of wrestling history to dive into. And speaking of wrestling history that we're diving into, I've got another piece. And this one was from even earlier. This dates back older. This was made in, I believe, 1999. And this is a Scholastic book back when kids used to get excited about bookstores coming into their school. This is where it ended up. So we'd go to the Scholastic days, you pay a couple bucks, and you get some books. And this book is not supported or endorsed by the WWF, WCW, or ECW, as it says on the disclaimer. This is from Scholastic Inc. But it's basically, this was made at the height of pro wrestling. October 2000, I'm sorry. October 2000 was when this was made. But it was very much a highlight of the people who were in 1999. And it had all of these people, both WCW and WWF. All the big names at the moment, but most of these ended up being WWE guys, with the exception of a couple, like with and we'll get into this and we'll just flip through it now. It's not a big book. It's only, I don't know, 50 pages long, yeah. And it was, it's got the real crashy Attitude Era print on it. And a lot of, like, the headlines are made with, like, the whole, I don't know how to put this, but, like, the serial killer type, like when they're, like, making a ransom note and they're doing, like, they tape a whole bunch of magazines together to make the note. So it's got a lot of that kind of, like, formatted type. They start with The Rock. They actually have some wrestling lingo in here, and I just noticed this. Goes to show how much I cared about anything other than the pictures. But they've got a lockup, babyface, healed. Wow, they even mentioned babyface and heel. Running spots. This is really running spots is a specific move. Put someone over, lay down the belt, and selling. And wow, and this was in 2000. This is a little surprising. I'm surprising now that I'm really looking at this. This was definitely made by a Smark, and I didn't really think about it. But man, that's. The fact that they even added wrestling lingo into here tells me that a Smark made this, which I'm sure I wonder if WWE would have sued Scholastic if they saw how many photos of theirs that they used. But they talk about The Rock, and they, of course, a lot of big pictures with The Rock's face, because it looks like they get like a full page, like a full opening, and then he goes into a little bit of the description of like who he is, and they talk about selling, and they've got the signature move in the corner as well. This is almost like a dossier of all the top guys. Like if you didn't know pro wrestling at the moment, like here's a rundown of who the cool people are and why they're so popular. And it starts with The Rock. I like that The Rock is throwing a people's elbow on Ken Shamrock during this one. And they even give his birth name, which is really interesting. So they really did break a lot of the walls. As far as, I mean, it's 2000, so everybody, it's not like everybody didn't know at that point, but still, but books like this didn't really occur I didn't think, at least until books like this that were really this kayfabe breaking, I didn't think occurred like this. And this is really interesting now that I see this book, just how much of this information is revealing to a young kid, and would explain maybe this book was a little more informative or transformative of my smarkdom. And I like how at the very bottom of literally every single page is this book is not supported or endorsed by WWF, WCW, or ECW. They have no ECW stars on here. I don't know why that was included. Next person up is Mankind. They say his birth name is Mick Foley, 6'2", 297, born they give his birth date. They talk about the Mandible Claw. You know, this is a smart book. But it's like a smart book that's kind of like teaching kids, all right, here are the coolest people to come and look at. Mankind participated, look at this. Mankind participated in ring wars that were named Match of the Year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. It's just a whole bunch of... It's more of just the description of the guys. It really is just a characteristic thing, like The Undertaker. The years in the ring, his body's beaten up. He's had surgery on his hip and knees, but he's not buried yet. And even if it was, the Taker's one dude who definitely rise from the tomb. So it's a little cheesily written, but still, but look at this. It says Mark Calloway, who wrestles as The Undertaker, played college basketball at Texas Wesleyan in Fort Worth. His position was center. And this is, wow. So this is really something. There's a lot more kayfabe snapping going on in this than I had originally given it credit for. And it's really fascinating going on further examinations, seeing this kind of stuff. When Mark Calloway, blah, 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 most people didn't know what to think. He was something frightening and new. Of course, they're just going to talk about the WWF. And they don't want to talk about me and Mark or any of the previous iterations. There didn't seem to be a real person underneath as compared to, say, Jesse the Body or Jake the Snake. So, obviously, this guy who wrote this, James Patrick, is definitely knows his salt in pro wrestling. It's just interesting to me that he was allowed to put this kind of stuff on paper like this. And maybe because it had been past the point of no return with pro wrestling. Who knows? But here comes Goldberg. And Goldberg, he's a throwback. Boy, did we underestimate just what that would entail come 20 years later. Bill Goldberg, blah, blah, blah. They gave this whole dossier. They give him a website. They have websites for these people. That is so weird. They give Bill Goldberg's personal email. Really? And most of these other guys, it's just WWF. But The Rock's got his own website, www.therock.com. I'm not going to give away Bill Goldberg's personal email, which I'm sure he doesn't use anymore because this was 2000. And nobody uses their email from 2000. I mean, a lot of these were WWF.com anyway. When moving in for the finish, Goldberg features a jackhammer. Yep. And let's see, is there anything else? In an age where microphone skills often matter more than ring skills, when flashy costumes seem more important than genuine toughness, Bill Goldberg stands out like a throwback to the glory days of Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales. Well, I wouldn't go that far, James. But this is but the fact that they even mentioned Bruno and Pedro. This is, I really am, truthfully, surprised. Outside the ring, Bill Goldberg is a big pussycat. He was named the national spokesman for the Humane Society, has testified before Congress in his fight for animal rights. His 3 cats are named Mo, Larry, and Curly. Again, who would... I feel like the wrestlers would actually get really upset looking at this. Because this would be a lot of... this is a lot of extra information, personal information, I'm sure that they would not want to, where they were preserving their gimmick. Mick Foley has written a lot of books. That was his big surprising leak. And then The Rock is the only third-generation wrestler, which is a lie now. So it goes to show this is pretty dated. Full page of Goldberg punching Bret Hart in the gut. That's great. Then the Big Show. And got the WWF. He must have just come in or pretty close to. They mention his hometown. They mention his birth name. His kayfabe breaking fact was on November 14th, 99. The Big Show came only the sixth man to hold both the WCW and WWF world titles. Okay, that doesn't matter. Joining Bret Hart, Hulk Hogan, Flair, Nash, and Savage. This was, they mentioned Shaquille O'Neal in Big Show's bit, which is kind of funny because they were going to have a match and then didn't. And then they familiarized them with who he was. Triple H makes the list, even though he really hadn't done a whole lot of Constitution other than being part of DX. But, you know, they show all the DX stuff with him, but they don't show any of the Cerebral Assassin. But that was probably because that was his prime was going on pretty much at the time this was released. He used to wrestle as Terra Rising in WCW before moving to the WWF in 95. Then he wrestled as Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Now he's Triple H. It sure beats his birth name, Jean-Paul Levesque. No disrespect. And he used to wrestle as Jean-Paul Levesque. If for those of you who don't remember, he actually did once or twice for WCW before he became Terra Rising. And then Stone Cold Steve Austin shows up on page 36. But I think this was also, remember, this was made because The Rock and Triple H were big and a lot of these other guys were big. But really, Stone Cold Steve Austin had just been run over and they were just starting to get to that feud. Texas Rattlesnakes, blah, 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 blah. Let's see, what's his dirty leaked fact? His fact is not always the bald, angry, tough-talking, blue-collar hero he is today. Stunning Steve once won tag titles with the Hollywood Blondes. Okay, that's lame. I guess at this time, that would have been surprising to people because he was all just whipping ass, opening up cans of whoop ass faster than they could manufacture them. Then they throw in Bret Hart. His father, Stu Hart, trained wrestlers such as Roddy Piper, Davey Boy Smith, and Chris Jericho, blah, blah, blah. His dirty fact is Bret lost his brother Owen Hart. Oh, they mentioned Owen Hart. And, wow, okay. Despite that, Bret's managed to continue his career in the ring, which was only for another, 6 months, and then Goldberg kicked him, and that might actually... I think that they actually put the picture of Bret wrestling Goldberg on here. That's unfortunate. Of course, Bret... I think it's not only just tragic with Owen, but it's also tragic with Bret. Both those guys really got raw ends of deals. Obviously, Owen at a much more staggering degree. And by the way, if you have not watched that Dark Side of the Ring episode with Owen, it is a rough watch, but it is worthwhile. It's nice to get a second perspective on the whole thing. And it again, like a lot of these did, it kind of balanced out common perception. So, and then we finish off with the last guy on this list is Chris Jericho, who I think had just debuted for WWF at the time, but I don't know whether he had. No, he just had. He had just won the Intercontinental title 99. You know, by the time I'm sure this was written, and then it took several months to actually get the photos and all that together. So when he was writing this, Mr. James Patrick, the author of this Scholastic book, not endorsed or authorized by WWF or WCW, which is now just WWF, which is now just WWE, Chris honed his acrobatic ring skills. This is his leaked fact. When wrestling in Mexico as Corazon de Leon. For those of you scoring at home, that's Heart of the Lion. And no, it's Lionheart Chris Jericho. So this guy obviously had some research. This dude had done his research, even though he was familiarizing people who may not have known, like a young impressionable kid, as such as myself, with all these wrestlers. There was some surprising kayfabe breaks in here that really did surprise me. And even now, because I had not really examined the book to that much of a degree, I feel like I've learned a lot just from looking at this book. And it'd be interesting to see if I actually took a little more in-depth time to read every little blurb, what else they mentioned here. But I think most of the big stuff was explained. But such a surprisingly candid and vivid and transparent examination into the great wrestling stars of the time, including original names and those types of people. So very interesting diving into the history books, literally, that I have obtained over the years. And what a great set of fun it is to dive into history. Next week, we're going to have JoshAgeddon on the show, and he and I are going to just have a regular show, and I'm not sure what we're going to talk about yet, but we are going to have a good time doing it. And that, my friends, is a fact. And with that said, and speaking of facts, it is time to move on to our match of the week. Now, I did not get the chance. I am working on an intro. I could say that with confidence. I am working on an intro. I've got part of it done. I'm not finished with it, but it's coming for that match of the week. But this one is a little somber anyway, so I don't want to put too much pomp and circumstance around it. And we're going to segue this into our Superstar Spotlight, and then we're going to call it quits for this edition. It's Miz versus Shad Gaspard from the October 21st edition, 2008 edition of WWECW. And we're going to talk about the match, and then we're going to talk about the guy, and it's obviously not The Miz. A lot of empty seats in the WWECW arena, and it's no surprise why, because all of the Sting had been completely sterilized, got WWE completely written all over it. Todd Grisham and Matt Stryker are on commentary, both of whom I like, so it's not a knock on either of those two individuals. So Shad and JTG come out, Miz comes out with Morrison, and then we get this started, and the first thing I saw, and it drove me nuts, and I hated seeing it, and I saw it throughout the whole match, and I know that Miz was really green at this time, so that obviously is a big part of it, but Miz kept shuffling his feet so often, especially when they went to those initial lockups. It was just shuffle, 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 shuffle to the left, shuffle to the right, kind of. It was a lot of extra wasted motion, and it didn't make him look intimidating or look like he was ready, trying to fight, let alone what his physical stature was at the time. But the more that I saw it, the less I could unsee it, which just Miz shuffling around side to side. It didn't work for me. It's particularly because the way that I've come to understand it is you really want to have your hips on a swivel, or almost actually the opposite of it. You want your hips locked, so not only are you not crossing your feet, but you never want to be shuffling your feet back and forth, because you can get off balance really easy that way. And again, this is just what I have inferred. So remember, please do not be taking any pro wrestling advice or lessons from me. just accept my smart's opinion and leave it at that. So Shad shoots Miz off the ropes, goes for a big back body drop, and Miz just ended up like a sack of potatoes. He didn't get up and over at all. He just kind of like landed, flopped on the side. It was awful. It was horrible looking. And then Shad, you'll see Shad look there, and he stiffs Miz on an Irish whip into the corner, and you could tell Shad was upset because it looked bad. It looked bad, and it was Miz's fault, and that was really the only bump that Miz did the whole matchup. Like it was very obvious that Miz was very green here. Shad, I'm impressed with for as little moves as he did. He looked impressive. He had a good look. He's very physically imposing. And then Miz hit some southpaw lefts, which just looked They didn't look like they had any sting or real stiffness to them, even if he wasn't being stiff, but just the illusion of stiffness. And then Shad has the advantage over Miz, and then JTG complains to the ref for no reason, which distracts the ref, and then allows Miz to throw Shad over the top rope. And instead, shouldn't that have been the heel distraction with John Morrison? It didn't make any sense to me. JTG, I thought, ended up being more of a hindrance in this match than a help. And it almost would have been better if JTG didn't come out and it was just those two. But, I mean, I know they're trying to sell the tag thing, but I'll explain how I would have done this better later. And then Todd Grisham starts talking jive, so to speak. And Matt Stryker's like, stop that. And Todd Grisham's like, nah, I like to feel the flow. And don't be a player hater. And he went on the whole match like that. I'm like, Todd, all right, tone it down, guy. You're being funny, but tone it down. And then Miz has Shad on the outside, and JTG, he throws Shad out, and he goes to throw Shad back in, and Miz is outside, and JTG is literally a foot away from Miz, and Miz seriously just snubs him. And JTG just yells at him, but it was like, there was an opportunity to really have a moment there, or to have JTG come in and you know, even the odds, but there was no evening of the odds because there were no odds to be evened because because Morrison didn't get involved until the finish, and JTG ended up getting more heat, or was doing stuff to get heat, not on purpose, but just from the way that they orchestrated this match, so it didn't make any sense. And then Shad starts making a comeback with some devastating strikes. His clotheslines look great. They looked painful. They looked stiff. It was great. All his strikes looks great. He has a back elbow. Reminded me a lot of Booker T, actually. And then they go to this finish, and this finish just doesn't make any sense to me. So Miz is trying to get some heat back on Shad. Shad gets... shoots off the ropes, and Morrison, the referee gets distracted with Morrison, right? And because Morrison hits Shad, and then the referee goes out and kind of, you know, distracts. I was talking to Morrison. Miz goes to hit the ropes on the opposite side, and JTG trips him, and which kills the heat because he's even the odds, and then Shad hits a big spine buster, 2 count. And then they go to continue doing more stuff. Shad goes through, he gets hit onto the ropes, and then John Morrison overtly hits a move that I hate because everybody does it now, which is the rope assist and Seguri to Shad's back, but the referee clearly saw it, and we got a disqualification on ECW programming. And this is why WWE ECW didn't work. Right there. That right there is a perfect example. And then JTG gets back in the ring, and then the heels leave, and the babyfaces stand in the ring, and nobody knows what to do because it was a big popcorn fart. Because the fans there was no one to cheer, there was no one to boo. It was just the match had happened, and that was done. And they pretty much took the fans out of the match because they did something to get heat with Morrison hitting Shad and then distracting the referee. And then they killed the heat by having JTG get involved on more than one occasion when he really Here's the way I would have done this. If you were trying to keep the baby faces, even though there was Cyber Sunday and it was you let the fans decide and all that. JTG for some reason can't make can't make it into the building, or you have a backstage segment where Shad says, "Nah, it's just the Miz. I got this." Right? Something to that effect. And JTG's like, "Yo, Morrison's going to be there." He's like, "Dude, don't worry. Look at me. I got it. I appreciate it, but I'm going to I'll handle this one. You need to rest yourself up for Cyber Sunday. You know, keep yourself fresh. I'm going to keep myself warmed up, and then we're going to go take it down." Or whatever. Shad comes out alone. Miz comes out with Morrison. They do portions of this match, but instead of JTG, and you could watch this match on the network, October 21st, 2008, Miz versus Shad. I didn't see this on YouTube, so you'd have to watch it on the network. But in any event, you have, instead of JTG bickering at the referee so the referee gets distracted, which allows Miz to take advantage, which doesn't make any sense, you have Morrison get up on the side, and you have Morrison on the side, and you have him distract the referee, and then Miz can do the same thing and throw Shad out of the ring. So it keeps the heat on Miz and Morrison, and it doesn't get JTG involved. Then Miz can continue to build and build and build and build and use some dirty-handed tactics, thumb to the eye, blah, 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 get some heat, but it's still Miz facing one-on-one. There was only one little piece of interference. And it was just a sleight of hand with the referee. Then Shad makes the comeback. He keeps making the comeback. He hits the strikes. He gets the clotheslines. He gets the big clothesline in the corner. He shoots him off the ropes and hits the back elbow, and now the fans are really starting to get into it. And at this point, Morrison can distract the referee and give that level of complaint, especially if Shad's rearing up. Miz hits a thumb to the eye, maybe an uppercut, maybe a low blow or something of that nature. And Miz goes and runs to the ropes to hit his move, which he was starting to do. Miz goes to hit his move, and instead of JTG tripping him, Miz just hits the ropes, come back, and Shad's fired back up and hits the spine buster anyway. And Morrison's freaking out, and he's all upset, and Shad goes for the cover. 1, 2, no. Even though I would have preferred him to just get the win here to set this up, but 1, 2, no, it's not enough. And so Shad's going to lay it into Miz. He wants to hit another move, but instead Morrison is now back up on the ropes, and he's trying to argue with the referee, and now Shad's going to go and get him. Shad's going to go and get him, and he goes to aim and cock his hand, and he hits him with the hand, and down goes Morrison. But as the referee is leaning out, talking, trying to break this up with Morrison, the Miz comes in and hits a low blow, but not fast enough for the referee not to see it. So the referee hits the DQ if you have to do a DQ. Do a DQ, and now another low blow, and let's say it was a thumb to the eye or something earlier. So this is a low blow, and he comes in, or they looked like at one point in the actual match that Morrison was going to toss Miz something, maybe as he actually I like that better. So as Morrison standing on the rope complaining with the referee, and you see him kind of baiting him in and kind of getting the referee in, and Shad's starting to go towards Morrison. Morrison can toss something up as Shad goes to hit him. Morrison gets hit. As Morrison's going down, he slides whatever it is, maybe a pair of knocks or just load the hand of Miz. And as that happened, Miz cocks up, bam, hits him with the right hand, but not fast enough for the referee not to see it. So the referee sees that it's, that Miz had hit him with the loaded weapon, or that Miz didn't throw it out in time. He gets the DQ, but Miz and Morrison still come to fight, and they're still beating down Shad. And then JTG can come back in, and he makes the comeback and makes the big save and takes out the Miz and throws him out, and takes out Morrison and throws him out. And then there's the two people, the heels have been foiled, the baby faces are established, they're standing tall, but they're still going to have to face each other. And even though this was a disqualification, there's still the heels have heat and can keep their heat, and the baby faces have cheers that can continue to keep them. It keeps both positions strong instead of just doing a big popcorn fart. And it's not because Miz was not that good of a worker at the time, even though he wasn't. You could have made this make sense while working through Miz's basic training. You could have made this to where it made sense enough to carry it into Cyber Sunday, even with the added stipulation of the fans get to decide. But this is, of course, trying to get logic and logical booking into WWE, and that's just a tall order. Is a tall order. But now, unfortunately, we have to go to the sad part of the day, and I don't really like ending shows on a low note. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk, at least for a couple minutes, about Shad Gaspard. I always liked Crime Time, the talent. I never really, they weren't necessarily like, oh, they're the top tag team or anything like that. I don't think they were. But they certainly both had a level of ability. I mean, Shad, I thought, for his size, could move around very well. He didn't need much to get over as far as moves went. But his selling was pretty good. He could talk, he and JTG could talk and I really appreciated, what they were able to do. Like, I love their segment with DX when they're outside in Manchester and they're like scalping for the tickets. And Shawn starts to speak jive, and Triple H is like the standard white guy from Connecticut. Like, he pulls out the tickets, and Triple H jumps back. He's like, oh, does he have a gun? And Shawn's like, no, he doesn't have a gun. It was just so funny. And Shad and JTG, they smacked Lita in the face with a sausage. Or no, I'm sorry, Triple H did that. Shad and JTG were just there at the time. But Crime Time definitely had a lot of really fun moments there. And I always was more a fan of Shad than I was JTG. And that's no knock on JTG. But I always saw more talent potential in Shad Gaspard. And I would have brought, if I were a promoter, I would have brought Shad in. as somebody. You know, I would have figured him in somehow to find his strengths if he didn't already know them and maximize them to get him over on a bigger basis. And I think that he would have deserved that. And I think that WWE kind of dropped the ball, as they do with a lot of really quality wrestlers, with Shad. And obviously he made some appearances as far as MLW, I think. And he was in that Wrestling Isn't Wrestling video, which released in roughly around the same time that I guess it was maybe the end of the year of 2014. But they've been around. You know, he was active quite a lot in you know, he was big friends with MVP, so you got to see a lot of stuff with him, and he was doing other stuff. I think he was just in a movie with Batista, and I only know this because I just saw Batista's Instagram talking about it. Birds of Prey, he was involved in that, and it kind of sounds like, from what I could infer, that his acting career was starting to get off the ground, which is really just, it's heartbreaking now. And I'm sure that you have all heard the news at this point about Shad Gaspard, that he is no longer with us after being pulled into a riptide and saving his son, and not coming out of that, not coming out of it. And you know, it's something that's really hitting the wrestling community, I think, hard, because, you know, we never really like losing one of our own, so to speak. But as somebody who was so young and really was just it's just a tragic accident, you know, nothing could have changed that. You know, it's not like it was like a drug addiction or something like that. It was the happenstance of nature, and it's, you know, that's the worst part about deaths like these. You know, it was one of the things that was what was so tragic about Eddie dying, was that Eddie, you know, he had his demons, but he had conquered those demons and was, you know, really had a good life and was really starting to turn things around. And then he has a heart attack at like the worst possible time. You know, the world works in mysterious ways. It really does. And it's some for good and some for ill, and this one hurt. This one hurt because it was a man that, from all accounts, was very widely respected, was very well liked, you know, didn't have many enemies, and was a true, you know, a good dad from what I've heard. And, you know, obviously I've never met him personally, but I was always I was a fan of his within the context of Crime Time, and I would have liked to have seen him more on a solo basis as an in-ring performer, as a wrestler. I would have liked to have seen him more as a single, and that's selfishly coming from me, but I've always given testimony to the skill of Shad Gaspard, and I think we're all gonna miss him in a way that I don't think any of us really expected. You know, I don't think, if you had told me 6 days ago that Shad Gaspard, you know, that Shad was gonna die. I mean, like, if you had told me then, like, I that something could have happened to Shad, I would have been like, okay, I mean, it sucks, but, you know, he wasn't the prominent name. He hasn't been a big prominent name in pro wrestling for a long time, but, you know, I think that we all as a community, especially when it's something so tragic like this, that it's just the circumstances of nature, it just catches us all off guard. And I think it definitely has with me. I know that I can't say that I've been shedding tears, but it's been weighing on me, you know. It really has. That, you know, such a good guy taken way too soon. And I recommend all of you check out some Shad if you get the chance, look him up on YouTube. Take a look at his in-ring work. Take a look at Shad, because I think he's better than he was ever given credit for, and I don't think he ever got the chance that he could have had. And I truly do think that he could have been big. I mean, really big in this business, had he had the right doors open at the right times with the right people involved. But now we're never going to know. And maybe we wouldn't have anyway. But rest in peace, Shad, and just know that my heart goes out to all of his family. My heart goes out to him. And there's going to be a toast for him tonight. And there really will. And there's really not much more to say than that. And I hate ending the Court Martial podcast on such a bummer. But unfortunately, this is the way life is sometimes. And it's the way that we all have to move on. It's really, his memory is always going to, in a way, I think, leave a bigger legacy now than he would have otherwise. At least in the pro wrestling business. Maybe as an actor he would have gotten bigger, but now we will all, I think, remember the name of Shad Gaspard and how great he was, and how great of a man he was, how good of a worker he was. And I know that, at least for me, I'm gonna hold a little special place in my heart for Shad Gaspard. And with that said, it is time to take our first commercial break. When we come back, JoshAgeddon is going to be on the show. We're going to talk about some entertaining stuff across the board. We're going to have a fun match of the week that is probably going to drive him absolutely crazy, and I cannot wait. But until then, stay tuned for a message from your local YouTube station. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be right back.